It's my real pleasure to introduce an old friend going back over 30 years now, Andrea Williams, on the subject of defending Christian freedoms. I can think of no one better to speak about this. Nowadays, it's much harder, isn't it, particularly in some jurisdictions, to live out our faith in the medical professions. Are we allowed to pray with patients? Can we express our faith to colleagues? What happens if a medical procedure conflicts with our faith? And with Christian freedoms under threat, those who work in the medical and healthcare fields are facing particular challenges when it comes to living out their faith, living and speaking for Jesus in the workplace. Now, Andrea qualified as a barrister back in 1988, and with her background in law, she founded Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre, which have run some of the most high-profile Christian freedom cases and campaigns in Europe. Andrea and I first met in the early 90s when I was head of student ministries at the Christian Medical Fellowship, and she had the same job at the Lawyers Christian Fellowship, and we did a lot of things together on campuses at that time for students. Andrea is a leading analyst, campaigner, and spokeswoman on issues of national importance in the moral life of the United Kingdom, and a defender of Christian liberties in the parliamentary process, the justice system, and the media. She's passionate about seeing culture transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ in every area of society. She's married to Gareth, and they have 4 children. So Andrea, delight to have you on ICMDA webinars. We look forward to hearing your talk. Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, it's really wonderful to be with you all today. Thank you to Peter Saunders, one of my great heroes of faith now across 3 decades. It's amazing in life to have these kinds of connections whereby you live, you know one another, and you are co-workers in the gospel in a particular nation. I have to say that since Peter has moved to the International Christian Medical and Dental Association, about which I'm absolutely delighted. But I have to say that as I continue to focus my life and work, specifically here in the United Kingdom, how much I miss him and how much I miss him in the daily battles over life and Christian freedoms in our nation. But I pray that what I bring to you all today is something that will enlighten each one of you, wherever you are, in whichever nation that you are in, to stand for your Christian freedoms, to speak for life and to speak family wherever you are. For sure, you are God's mouthpiece, his witness, his ambassador, wherever you are. And I hope that you will be able to translate what I bring today, which is very specifically UK context, which we can extend to a sort of Western context. But I very much hope that you will be able to learn from what I bring, apply it to your own nation, understand where necessary the warning, and hopefully therefore put in place tools in order to resist that which might be coming your way, or to understand where you are alongside the Western world, as it were, and to work out how we can build alliances in order to push back on those things which would fetter Christian freedom and the Christian truth from going out in the public space. So it is true to say that we live in a confused world, a divided world, a world where in this coronavirus pandemic, which is indeed a global issue, we've been told to follow the scientists, or to follow the science, because even in the interpretation of the science around coronavirus, there have been varying interpretations and varying ways in which we've worked it out. Similarly, around the sexual revolution, human identity, what it means to be human, climate change, race, Afghanistan, North Korea, Nigeria, China, we're seeing massive global unrest and division, massive global poverty. These issues appear too big, too confusing for us to solve. wherever you are in the world, as you listen in this afternoon, I'm in the afternoon here in the United Kingdom. I want to say to you that you as a medic are someone that God has placed in a certain place at a certain point in history with your specific knowledge. And he's placed us here today together. And in order to solve a world, a situation that is confused, God uses his people. And the way in which he uses us is spelt out very clearly, interestingly. It's a much used verse. It's an often repeated verse. But in 2 Chronicles 7, that we're shown this. God made a promise to Solomon, this is 3,000 years ago, and gave a specific path for his people. If my people, so that's you and me, are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. I think that what has struck me in recent years about this verse is this. I used to think about it as the whole nation turning back to God, all people turning back to God. But it's very specific, the promise to Solomon. It's God is speaking to his people. And that's what struck me recently. Is if my people, so it's if you and I, it's if the church in a nation turned back. In the midst of confusion, in the midst of division, in the midst of rampant poverty, in the midst of situations where we see the hard persecution of Christians, and where we see Christians being put to death, in the midst of these situations, what is the answer? It's the answer is for God's people to turn from their wicked ways for the healing of the land. And then again, these very simple promises. In Proverbs 14, it says this: if righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. So a nation, therefore, is a reflection of the church, of Christians within the nation. And I want to say to you as critics that it's your role, most specifically in the nation, to understand what God has given you to do around the protection and sanctity of life, around how it is that we apply medical knowledge to the situation that we are in, at whatever point of development in terms of medical knowledge that nation is in at that time. That's a very high calling. It brings much responsibility. And creation waits, Romans 8 tells us, in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. I want to say to you, medics, that creation is waiting in each of your nations. Medicine is waiting in each of the nations for you, the children of God in medicine, to be revealed. I'm sorry for the typo in my slide there. For you to be revealed. So wherever you stand, if it's in a nation that's AIDS-ridden, or in a nation that's corrupt around medicine, in a nation that's very, very developed around reproductive technologies and artificial intelligence, then that nation is waiting for the Christian medics to be revealed. Medicine is waiting for Christian medics to be revealed wherever you are. And that is my challenge to you across the globe today. The truth is this, that what very often happens in any nation with a church, certainly in the Western world, this has happened. And I want to challenge you as to whether this has happened within the discipline of medicine, is that we as Christians, that we as the church, come to look no different from secular medicine. It's as if we become, as medics, so attractive to our discipline, to our profession, that we're afraid to challenge it. We make idols of our profession. We've been saturated by what the world applauds rather than by the standards that Jesus drives us to. And the answer in the midst of this is to humbly confess, to pray, and to seek Jesus Christ. And in 1 Chronicles, we're promised this. The sons of Issachar, the wise men, the leaders, had an understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. In medicine, your role is to understand what is going on in your field and the challenges to it at this specific time, and to understand what you ought to do. So to develop for the good, to resist for the evil, to speak truth and proclaim the truth of God, the truth of Christ within that. And God needs very few within any chosen profession. He needs very few within the church in the land to make the difference. The sons of Issachar, the men that understood the times and knew what Israel ought to do, were only 200 men. That was approximately 0.06% were the sons of Issachar that understood and were able to change what happens. So what do we need to understand in our own nations, in our own fields? Where is it that the gospel is under attack? The gospel in terms of the whole revelation of God, from Genesis to Revelation. Well, it is that we, man and woman, we are made in the image of God, male and female, Genesis 1. That Jesus Christ is supremely and the only way to God, the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. And we can only be saved through salvation in him. And then when we abandon him, we end up living according to our own sinful desires. And Romans 1 paints a picture of what happens when we do that. And we see this in the idolatry of the West at this time, where we have idolized sex, idolized our bodies. And so we have ended up with a culture that exchanges the truth for a lie. We serve created things. We serve the body. We serve self rather than the creator. And we see end stage cultures ending up in a situation whereby women exchange natural relations with other women for unnatural ones, and men are inflamed with lust for one another. And so we see us hurting one another's bodies. So in Romans 1, we see the exchange of truth for a lie. We worship in the culture and serve that lie. We practice it. And then in law, we approve of that lie. And we say to speak against that, whether in law, in medicine, in the culture, to speak against it, to point to God's truths, becomes something that is punished within the law. And that's the position that we have got into here in the United Kingdom and broadly in the West. But the imperative in Romans 1 is to not be ashamed of the gospel, because in the gospel is the righteousness of God that is from first to last. And to know that in the confusion, Jesus Christ is the image of God, and in him all things hold together, that he is the total structure of truth before all things, and in him able to reconcile all things. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in world as there was the approach in Germany towards World War II, and as he was challenging the state, said this: there are three possibilities for action that Christians can take vis-a-vis the state. First, as to the legitimate state character of its actions, making the state responsible for what it does. So as medics, you have a specific responsibility to understand what the state is doing vis-a-vis medicine in your nation. Second, that where people are suffering, there is an unconditional obligation towards the victims of any societal order, even if they do not belong to the Christian community. So we are there to bandage up people. We are there to do what is good for all. But the third possibility is not to just bind up the wounds of the victims beneath the wheel, but to seize the wheel itself. If we allow medical ethics to so move away from Christian morality, then we as the Christian medics in our nation must seek to seize back the wheel, to seize back the structure ourselves in order for chaos not to abound. And where chaos abounds, so disorder abounds, and so death abounds. Martin Luther said this: if I profess of Christians of the role of the church to be the prophet and the priest to the king, if I profess the loudest voice and clearest exposition, every portion of the word of God, except precisely that little point which the world and the devil are at that moment attacking, I am not confessing Christ, however boldly I may be professing him. Where the battle rages, there the loyalty of the soldier is proved, and to be steady on all the battlefronts besides is mere flight and disgrace if he flinches at that point. So where is the battle raging? Well, the example I want to give you is here in the United Kingdom. When our Queen came to the throne nearly 70 years ago, in 1953, in the United Kingdom, she was handed a Bible. That's quite extraordinary. But from the Archbishop, she's asked, will you to the utmost of your powers maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel? She said, all this I promise to do. She is handed a Bible, and she's told this about the Bible. This is wisdom. This is the royal law, the most valuable thing this world affords. These are the lively oracles of God. Now, this gives you a picture of where we were 70 years ago in the United Kingdom, upholding within our unwritten constitution the Bible as the most valuable thing the world affords. And it was there for the whole life and government of Christian princes. Now, let us look at what has happened since the Queen came to the throne. Well, in the United Kingdom, when the Queen came to the throne, abortion was illegal. Today, effectively, we have abortion on demand. When the Queen came to the throne, 4.8% of babies were born outside of marriage. Today, it's 46%. When the Queen came to the throne, there were 350 marriages with a population of 50 million. Today, with 16 million more people, and there are 241,000 marriages. Today, every year in the United Kingdom, there are around when the Queen came to the throne, there are about 33,000 divorces. Today in the United Kingdom, there are 200,000 divorces every year. That is a massive social revolution. So where is the world and its truth under attack? Where is the gospel under attack? Where is the attack at this time? It's around, and therefore Christian freedom in the Western world, the protection of life, the pattern for family, and the place of Jesus Christ. So I'm going to give you the example of the United Kingdom, and I want you to parallel it with wherever you are in the world. Abortion was illegal until 1967. Before then, it would have been unconscionable to contemplate the taking of any life, whether in the womb, from the moment of conception to the point of natural death. This is a very, very high and beautiful bar. As Christian medics, we would believe in that bar. As Christian lawyers, we would believe in that bar. When we allow the law to permit abortion, even in rare circumstances, it creates a weakness in the law. And that is what happened in 1967. So although the law was very high, saying that it is illegal unless, and two doctors would need to sign it off, we created a loophole whereby it said that pregnancy could be terminated if the risk of mental health to the mother was greater if she continued with the pregnancy, and two doctors would have to sign off on that particular reason. What we have today, in effect, in the United Kingdom is a situation where doctors day in, day out commit perjury because they say that a woman will have worse mental health if she continues with a pregnancy. Our law has not changed. Let us have a look at the statistics. In 1967, abortion was also meant to be very rare. There were 21,400 abortions that year. This is the government statistics in England, Scotland, and Wales. By 2019, there were 304,000 abortions in that year. And since the passing of the Act in the United Kingdom, 9.5 million abortions have taken place. You see, that social revolution since the Queen came to the throne has in fact been very bloody indeed. 9.5 million lives taken in the United Kingdom since the passing of that Act. So in law, that we have that many missing citizens is a massive number, but it's all done in men in white coats, a medical profession that permits it, a legal profession that permits it, and a church that permits it. The only people that God has to speak in any nation is you and I. Let's have a look at the COVID stats for which the whole world has stopped versus the abortion stats. Well, in the United Kingdom, deaths with COVID on the certificate have been 163,000 from 20 to 2021. The death of our unborn children is 340,000, so that's double the number. This year, from January 2021 to October 2021, deaths by abortion across the globe are 35 million. Deaths by COVID are 4 million. That's massive. What happens when you cross a line? We have doctors in the United Kingdom now permitting abortions because the mental health of the mother will not cope if she has a female baby. So we have in Britain, this was caught on camera, female babies being aborted. When we sought to bring this to the attention of the Crown Prosecution Service, when the Crown Prosecution Service would not prosecute it, and we launched a private prosecution, this is in 2013, 2014, the Crown Prosecution Service said that it was not in the public interest to prosecute doctors that were prepared to commit an abortion on a baby simply for being female, for feticide. This is in the United Kingdom. When Aisling sought to bring, this is the young lady who with us sought to bring the cost, she was told that she would face costs of £50,000 just for trying to expose this injustice. Doctors, dentists, medics, who is going to expose feticide? Who is going to expose that twice the number of people will not commence their lives than those who are dying with coronavirus? When are these statistics going to be made real? Only you as medics can bring this to the attention of those around you. In the United Kingdom, during the coronavirus pandemic, we became a situation where emergency legislation came in. But what did our government do? It permitted for abortion to be done now by a telephone call or through a screen, as I am speaking to you through a screen right now. So now a woman can call up as I'm speaking to you now, say that she's pregnant, say that she doesn't want to have her baby, say that she is feeling unwell, mentally unwell. 2 doctors will sign off on this. And this is a packet that we actually got through the post for a woman to take 2 pills to have an abortion at home. What is happening now since that has occurred? Well, 1 in 17 women who have pills by post abortion are ending up in emergency hospitals here in the United Kingdom. But no one is talking about it. How can this be? Can you imagine any other medical intervention whereby women would be ending up in accident and emergency? Any pill being sold over the counter in a pharmacy, any pill being prescribed across a screen that have this kind of failure and emergency medicine rate. This is why it's the medics that need to speak out, the medics that need to be vigilant. This is the kind of place that it ends up. Here are the faces of some of the women who've had pills by post abortion, who wanted it to be reversed. This is a doctor, Dr. Kurt Kearney, who was helping women to reverse from the effects of the first reversal pill. There are some 90 babies that have now been born as a result of his and another doctor's work. But guess what? The medical agencies in this country have threatened to remove his license as a consultant cardiologist if he continues with this practice. But worse, they have stopped him from saving the babies. They have stopped him from providing progesterone in order for the women to keep their babies, despite not all the women keeping their babies, some of them still going on to lose them, but all the babies being born healthy. So the doctor that is saving lives is punished in our nation. And we are allowed now for doctors to send out pills by post for abortion. This is the world in which we've ended up in the United Kingdom. I want this to act as a warning for why you must stand and for why you must speak out, and also for developing, for the nations that are receiving aid from the United Kingdom, that the DIY abortion pills, the misoprostol and mifepristone, are the pills that they want to say, want to give to you as fertility medicines. They want, in exchange for aid, they want to ensure that you're giving this kind of so-called treatment to women in these kind of situations in your nations. This is why you must consider aid. You must push back on the parameters and the conditions that people put on aid in order to make the difference where you are. And you will all know that crossing one line does not end there. We have ended up, through our Human Fertilization and Embryology Act, being able to create embryos, because we now can, through in vitro fertilization, with the express purpose of experimenting upon them and then destroying them. We in our nation create cloned human embryos. That's an affront to God. We create animal-human hybrid embryos, the mixing of cow's eggs with human sperm. These are affronts to God. This is where medicine can take you. God has only you, the Christian medics, the Christian ethicists, the Christian dentists, those with this knowledge to speak into your nations, to speak truth to power. You are the men of Issachar. You are the men that can ensure that you do not go where we go. But it doesn't have an impact just on medicine. It has an impact. This is the kind of situation that can be created where a woman who takes hormones to transition to look like a man, who wants to say she is the father of a baby, is now deemed to be family and recognized in family in law. And to speak against this, to say that it is not, that she is in fact the mother and not the father, becomes something for which you may find yourself in trouble, even as a medic. These are the realities. It's not just about narrow fields of medicine. It impacts life, family, culture, truth. It affects aid. It affects whether you'll be given it. It affects your freedom. You are in a very specific and privileged position to speak. Understand these things early, speak early. Take yourself into positions of policy influence within your fields. Speak into government, get onto boards, be intentional. Do it early. For those nations that are not yet where we are, get in early and build next generations so that there will be a continuity of speaking into the powerful places. Do not let your medical overseeing bodies, such as our General Medical Council, do not let them be bodies that are so infiltrated by secular thinkers. You must dominate these places. Otherwise, the culture will dominate you. We have situations why now, because of the crossing of lines, the fact that the embryo is not viewed as valuable, you have the men, 2 men, Tom Daley, they're able to have families, and that's celebrated across the world. So suddenly you have the possibility of same-sex couples having families to move, and that is massive in terms of defining what a family is in law, and actually how you're permitted to speak about family in every other sphere of life. And I'll come on to that a little bit later in this presentation. I'm going to whiz very quickly. Now I've got about another 7 minutes left, and hopefully that will still leave time for questions. On assisted suicide, we've had a recent attempt last week to, again in our nation, the push continually to for assisted suicide. It's been attempted, 14 attempts in the UK in the last 11 years. But let me just show you the mentality of our government. That government, the same government that during the COVID restrictions that said we had to wear a mask, that we couldn't go out, and said that we couldn't travel, made an exemption for those that wanted to travel to Switzerland to kill themselves. Matt Hancock, our then health secretary, said that people can leave their home to travel abroad to kill themselves. So this generation that's permitted, that has had abortions, will be killed. The generation that killed its children will be killed by its children. The mentality that we have, that the children are unwanted, the elderly that are unwanted, this is end stage culture. And I want to ask you, I want to, again, wherever you are on this, in this globe, I want you to be thinking about this wherever you are, because protecting the dignity and sanctity of life at both ends is imperative at every point. So then around family, because you see the contraception pill, again, that's medicine. Divorcing the high price of God's place for sexual expression between one man and one woman leads to a situation whereby you have more so-called free sex with it, outside that construct. The contraception pill hasn't brought down unplanned pregnancies. We see the huge rise in unplanned pregnancies, babies outside of marriage, and this, you get cohabitation laws that mirror marriage laws, and marriage is no longer held in a high and solemn place within society. You suddenly get laws that in effect allow for no fault divorce, no fault divorce. Then with all of this, you have a massive rise in the homosexual lobby as sex becomes outside the parameters of marriage. You get a huge push around homosexuality and all those relationships being recognized as equivalent to heterosexual relationships in law. You get a massive rise in pornography, and there's massive pornography within the church with all of its implications. With all of these things, we have the health and mental health risks that are associated with sexual practice in this way. So depression, sexually transmitted diseases, all of these things we need to serve the kingdom of hope and restoration into. That's what Christian medics can do wherever they are. What the governments in the Western world want to do is send aid to developing nations to say, be more LGBT friendly. We need to promote programs of sexual beauty, where human sexuality, rightly understood as God intended it, is profiled and promoted, not the freedom the so-called freedom that leads to chaos, promiscuity, and dreadful medical consequences and hurt. Not to mention the wholesale redefining within nations of family, ability to have family because of all the reproductive technologies. Here's Elton John and his partner and their 2 sons. And then all of that being entirely normalized within the law. And so what you then get, as our Prime Minister back in 2011 did, is conservative governments promoting same-sex marriage within the law, church leaders agreeing with it. This is our Archbishop of Canterbury saying that it needs to be recognized. Deputy Prime Ministers saying it's all going to become very normal. And the answer is yes. And where does it become normal? In our education system. This is an LGBT, this is a letter to us from the Department of Education saying that the pronouns are she and her. Well, that's a matter of medicine. Now we have a situation in our nation where officials of state define themselves according to how they think, not according to how they biologically are. Well, that's a matter of medicine. Saying that they're LGBT champions. And what has impacted in schools, that suddenly in our schools, we're told that these relationships, man and man, woman and woman, and having babies is all very, very normal. Well, do you see how in this very quick stop tour, I've tried to show you how not caring for sanctity of life, alongside the rest, leads to the redefining of family, and this being taught, transgenderism, that comes hot on the foot of it, and all of this gets entirely transposed to our children. Here are books for our nursery school children. King and King. These are 8 and 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. And then we have a situation where drag queens in our country are teaching our children. I want to say this as a warning to the nations that are not in the West. This has happened rapidly for us. It will happen to you. And when you get aid, often government aid, this is where this agenda leads. So this is a 10-year-old in a school who, because she said she didn't want to participate in Pride, was suspended for school for 5 days. Social services in our nation visited her mother, threatening to remove her from her mother, and the police visited her mother, saying she had been indoctrinating Casey with hate. We've had to safe school Casey, true story. This is a doctor, Dr. David Makareth, who said that he was refused a government job because he said that he would not say that a biological man was a biological woman. And for that, he lost his job as a doctor. We've got to a position whereby to say that costs you as a doctor your job in the United Kingdom. This must act as a warning. Here we have 2 counsellors, again, medical theory, medical counselling, therapeutic counselling. People that voluntarily come to them saying they want to move away from same-sex attraction, that's now prohibited. It's prohibited by all the professional bodies because they say you cannot change, sexual orientation cannot be changed. So those that try to help people who are suicidal, who are depressed because of what they are doing sexually, are banned. This must be resisted in the nations where you are. They call it conversion therapy. We've heard about Ghana is live. There are various places, this ban on so-called conversion therapy. It's actually a ban on people getting the help they need, very often to move away from sexual practices. Doctors, dentists, medics, therapists, understand this is a ban on your freedom, a ban on your Christian freedom, a ban on the gospel going out. Death threats against Michael, death threats against me, indeed, in the midst of this case. Social workers removed from their courses for saying that children do best with a mother and father. Magistrates removed because they want to place a child with a mother and a father. Parents having to remove their children from schools because 8-year-olds in the class are going to, little boys are going dressed as girls. And let me say this, it's taken us 3 years to find medical professionals who are brave enough to speak on this, because the medics are so concerned that if they speak out on this issue, they will be targeted. So I want to say, build your alliances, find one another so that you can speak strongly to your medical body, so that you can speak strongly into your nation. Call upon us so that we can tell you these true stories of what it is that is happening in our nation. We're building a parallel system of schools, chaplains removed from their schools, teachers removed, pastoral assistants, helping for medical care in schools, removed Chrissy Higgs from their positions. All of these can be found on our website. Nurses told not to offer Bibles, to remove their crosses. Many of these cases, to not speak about Jesus at the bedside of their patients. Doctors come under scrutiny for giving witness to their patients, because to be Christian in and of itself is viewed as phobic, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic in our nation very often, if caught. So let me say, what is it that is vital? That you remain open. Christ's hospitals remain open. The gospel of Christ remains open. That you understand that you are a key battlefield in this arena at this time. Let me understand that let me also say, this is the hard secularist agenda. Rising up in many of your nations will be hard Islam. That there, Islam will also not tolerate Christianity. In the United Kingdom, this is the kind of thing that we've been seeing. We love our Muslim neighbours and we want to serve them. But you'll begin to see a medicine infused with Islamic protocols versus Christian protocols. Sharia law being implemented. You need to notice where we're seeing female genital mutilation. We need to be able to call this kind of thing out, where we're seeing forced conversion, where we're seeing deaths, where we're seeing brutality. We need to have the courage to call these things out. This will be some of what you are facing in your nation. If you medics, dentists, understand where you're at in your nation at this time, across this global context, and humble yourselves and repent and turn from your wicked ways, understand your times and lead the nation. I pray that you'll be enlightened and educated and envisioned and equipped for God's kingdom purposes wherever you are. Let's have a longer horizon, a wider scope, and a better network to tackle this together. I pray in this very fast whistle-stop tour of how we've come to so override sanctity of life, so override God's blueprint for family, then having an impact on our very freedom to live and work as doctors, as dentists, as Christians, because we're denying medicine itself, will be awakening you at this time. And I hope that it's of help to you. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We've been listening to Andrea Williams of Christian Concern on defending Christian freedoms, speak primarily from a UK context, but talking about things that are happening all over the world that we need to be aware of. So we've got time now for question and answer. Andrea, you've painted an extraordinary picture, which I think will be very surprising to many outside the UK, but we've gone, as you've eloquently shown, from a situation in 1953 where the Queen is charged by the Archbishop of Canterbury to uphold the ethics and the faith of the Bible, in just 70 years to a situation where we have approaching 10 million abortions, far fewer marriages happening than were happening, and 46% of all children born outside wedlock, along with the erosion of Christian freedoms that you've been talking about as well. And you've talked about a post-Christian society or even an end-stage society. And in just 70 years, what do you think, what's been the cause of this dramatic change in British and Western culture in really just a lifetime? And what are the things that people in other countries where this hasn't happened to the same degree should be looking out for? What do you think's driven this incredible change?
I think Christians have been asleep on their watch. They haven't understood the times, particularly Christian leaders. So we haven't really loved God. And I think in a nation like Great Britain, we were complacent. We didn't think that we could get to where we're at. And this is again what I want to say to other nations. This is happening in England. 3 weeks ago, I was in court with a nurse who worn a tiny cross for 30 years. And she was being told that she had to remove it, that it was jewelry. That in a previous case, 11 Christian judges said that the cross was not a Christian symbol. It took an ex-communist Polish judge in the European Court of Human Rights to say that the cross was a Christian symbol. We've been fighting for the cross in the United Kingdom for the past 15 years in our nurse cross cases. Now, I'm glad that in this last case, it wasn't so hard. They seemed to accept that the cross was a Christian symbol. We thank God. But I want to say to you, this is the United Kingdom. That even in the case that went to Europe, the United Kingdom government said that the cross was a piece of jewelry. So this is where, if this can happen to the United Kingdom, which the world still thinks of as a Christian country, it can happen anywhere else. So I think that so if you think it's okay where you are, if you think we haven't got masses of abortions, or we won't redefine the family, that these things won't come to us, we are free to speak our faith. We're a Christian. It can happen very fast. If you'd ever said to me when I first knew Peter in the 1990s that I would have cases, that I would be defending a doctor who lost his position as a government doctor because he said, I cannot say that a biological woman is a man. In fact, he was asked this: if a 6'2" bearded man came in and wanted to be referred to as a woman, would you do that? He said, I couldn't do that. And for that question was asked. He said no, and he lost his job. I mean, it sounds like we're on a different planet. Well, we're on the same planet, everyone here, let me tell you, but this is the United Kingdom. This was unimaginable to me when I first knew Peter. Indeed, same-sex marriage was unimaginable to me. Animal human hybrids was unimaginable to me. Cloning human embryos was unimaginable to me. Abortion by 2 pills by post was unimaginable to me. And it's only God. And I think, Peter, though, at the end of the day, this is a long answer to that question, but it's, do we love him? And are we bold enough to speak of him wherever we are?
Andrea, tell us just a little bit in general terms, you've hinted at it, that the work that Christian Concern is doing to protect the sanctity of life, to protect marriage, to protect Christian freedoms, and so on. And you, I mean, I know you publish, you're involved in court cases, you try to shape parliamentary law as well. Have you seen any encouragements as a result of your intervention where things could have perhaps been much worse had you not been involved?
I say that standing is winning. In that, I think sometimes people say, but you're losing. I say we're standing. And it's really important to stand for gospel truth. And I pray that as we've stood and we've shown you what's happened in the United Kingdom, if you're in a position where you can still safeguard things in your nation, please stand and believe that you can win and resist the tide. And I think, Peter, we've seen assisted suicide. You and I have been in that battle over 3 decades. And we do not have assisted suicide in our nation. And I thank God for that. I thank God for that. I can see a new and rising generation of pro-life men and women, young men and women, that we've been standing and we're serving them. And I can see them rising up. We have a team at Christian Concern of some 30 people. We have 5 full-time lawyers working on cases seeking justice. I mean, again, the cross cases, just standing whilst at one point it looked like we were losing, the fact that we are there, still there, 20 years on, saying that this is an expression of faith, means that we are winning.
I know this is not a medical area so much, but you've been incredibly successful in defending street preachers who've been arrested in the UK just for preaching the gospel or talking about Christian ethics, and you've been incredibly successful getting those people out of jail and off. And so there's no question that when Christians with the right skills do get involved, it makes a real difference to defend Christian liberties. I wonder if we can just go to the developing world, and you talk quite a lot about the way that aid is being tied to ideology, and Western groups, particularly working either as sovereign governments or through international agencies, are trying to impose abortion laws, same-sex marriage laws, and all sorts of legal reform in the global south. We've got a question here from Alex Bolek, who's one of our regional secretaries. He's asking, how can African governments and churches be sensitized on these issues, particularly where humanitarian aid has strong links to abortion? So what can doctors in the global south do to oppose these moves?
Well, I think exactly what we're doing right now, which is networking, get very informed. I would say it would be great to hold conferences and present to your government the reality of what has happened, for instance, in the United Kingdom. I think we're an amazing case example. And I'm going to be so bold as to say, broker, resist it, say that you do not want it. So we have an education work that's commenced at Christian Concern in the past couple of years. We've set up we've been involved in setting up 20 schools that no longer want to participate in state education, involved in home education networks. At some point, you have to say, if this aid is tied to this, we cannot accept it, and believe that God will be the provider. I mean, God provided for missionary hospitals. This is to actually think of yourself in that way. Or to because you are delivering the service, to say to the government, that part of it, we cannot countenance. We cannot promote the LGBTQ agenda. We cannot promote your family planning agenda. Be clear that you're that you are pro-life, that you will look after women, that you will look after their babies. Be bold in this. Be bold from the beginning, and do not fear stating it and saying it, because the Lord will honor it. What we've not had is enough people saying it boldly enough and clearly enough from the very beginning. And you have we've got all the stats, we've got all the data, you've got all the lived experience of what happens, because we're living it here in the United Kingdom and in the Western world, and we can bring it all to you. We can give it to you. But you see, what we're now doing is we're having to build we're having to build the new institutions in this country, the safe institutions. That little girl I spoke of, and the children of Casey, she is safe schooled. We've safe schooled in the past year at Christian Concern 7 children who've resisted the ideology coming into the states. I mean, it's 7, but these are the ones we know of.
You mentioned earlier about this, particularly the case of home abortion, and the fact that 1 in every 17 of these home abortions ends up in hospital with complications, and yet it's not reported. Why do you think it is that national newspapers are not reporting illegal or unethical practices? Why is it so difficult to get the word out?
Because we essentially, policies and laws are downstream of culture. So we have a situation whereby the media, the judges, the lawmakers, they do not necessarily know God. Most of them do not know God, and so they don't understand. They're not men of Issachar. They don't understand. And so there is so that's why even this scandal is not reported. Well, we're hoping to get it reported in the coming days, but it's not reported because the way in which their thinking is framed is that it's a blindness, it's a spiritual blindness. And that is actually, I mean, that is actually why why our job is so important. We have to keep on speaking. At some point there will be a tipping point. It's not that things aren't, it's not that there's a total vacuum, but we need to make we need to make it louder. We have to, I mean, you can see where there's actually beginning to be some pushback around the whole transgender issue, for instance. But essentially, as a culture, we have accepted and promoted homosexuality, transgenderism as norms, pornography as norms, sexualization of our children as norms, and anti-God as anti-science as a norm, all of these things as a norm. And that's why it can't penetrate. That's why numbers aren't penetrating. And so this is again, so it's why actually thought leadership is really important. What's happening in our academies is really important. So again, as medics, if you are knowing those in your universities and so on, you need to be thinking through these things. It's why we have a training arm called the Wilberforce Academy. Again, this is stuff that we'd really love to bring to you. Peter's on faculty of the Wilberforce Academy, but to really try and help emerging leaders in our nation and beyond to understand the times across a week of training.
Thank you. Just one final question, really. And I was really struck by the Bonhoeffer quote that you brought up near the beginning of your talk, and talking about the three approaches that Christians could take. And one was, of course, binding up the wounds of the victims, and a number of people asking questions that we haven't had time to get to are talking about how important it is for Christians to be involved, for example, in providing alternatives to abortion, shelters, support, good antenatal care, and so on. And that's something you're very supportive of. And then the second thing you talked about was the importance of speaking truth to power, or Bonhoeffer mentioned, being a voice. But he was saying that the third way is doing both, is being both a binder of the wounds and also someone who spoke truth to power to try and stop bad laws getting worse or bad laws getting onto the statute books. So just finally, Andrea, and I know you've touched on this already quite a lot, but what advice would you give to Christian doctors who are living in societies which have not gone down this route quite so much as we're seeing in Britain with regard to the sanctity of life, marriage, and Christian freedoms? What counsel would you give to people where these things are just starting?
This is the counsel that I would give. What happens very often is Christians, what's happened to Christians a lot in the West and in the United Kingdom is that we've allowed ourselves to become social workers. So we're binding up the wounds, we're doing the social service, but we don't give Jesus. We don't, and it's as if the government tells us you can't do Jesus, you can't pray, you can't give a Bible. This is all prohibited. In fact, it's dangerous. In fact, it's potentially hate speech. And so we're scared. We've become scared, and we retreat. But we keep on being the social service, compliant to the state. I want to say that who is it that radically transforms and changes? Well, it's the gospel that radically transforms and changes. That's the power of God. Drug users are totally transformed by the power of the gospel. People in sexual immorality are powerfully transformed by the power of the gospel. Women in unplanned pregnancies and their children are saved by the power of the gospel. That's the thing that goes into all eternity. And I want to say to Christian medics and doctors and dentists, literally or metaphorically, wear the cross. Wear the cross. Love Jesus. Stand for him. Take his name boldly into your workplace. Do not let his name and his truth be absent. Jesus Christ is a public figure. He's public truth. All things emanate from him. And it's as if we have become embarrassed by him, ashamed of him in the West. Where you are, do not let that happen, but do not let what obedience to him means, which is not being ashamed of him and his words around sanctity of life, what it means to be family, what it means to respect the dignity of humankind, and freedom means.
Thanks so much, Andrea. That's a great challenge. And it's a chilling reminder too that we are in danger of losing the freedoms that we don't stand up for. And thank you for the challenge and for your example in everything you've done over the last 30 years or so in fighting for Christian freedoms in the UK, and I know also around the world. So it just remains for me to say thank you again. Thank you so much, Andrea, for your wisdom, for your courage, for your eloquence and the challenge today, and to all of you for joining us today on ICMDA webinars. May the Lord bless you. Thank you.